Уважаемые друзья, дамы и господа,
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I welcome you at the Russia Calling Forum. This forum traditionally gathers our friends from all over the world, leading businessmen, investment managers and consultants who are recognized experts in finance and economy. This time, though, the forum takes place in an unusual format, in an online format. I do hope that it would not stop us from frankly and directly discussing the most important topics of economic agenda. We will discuss the issues which concern professional business communities in Russia and all over the globe. The key factor which has defined global economic dynamics this year is the coronavirus pandemic. We see that a serious economic downturn has hit developed and developing economies, and that major financial support is earmarked for national economies. For Russia, an undeniable priority is the protection of life and health of Russian people, the well-being of Russian families. This logic has defined our actions during the epidemic, and in this logic, we have also adopted a package of anti-crisis measures which are aimed at keeping jobs, incomes of the citizens, and boosting new orders in production chains. I would like to highlight that the overall federal financial support this year stands at 4.5% of the GDP. We know that in some countries the figure is even bigger, but the decisions taken were quite timely and quite efficient, and this is the most important thing. We have managed to soften the impact. However, the economic recession is less deep than in other countries of the world. You are well aware of that, although risks are still there. At the same time, I would like to highlight that despite the complex epidemiological situation, we are prepared to work in these conditions much better than we were in the first half of the year. Just recently, at various government meetings, we have discussed that there are various issues which we need to focus on. There are regions which require special attention, but overall, the situation is better. This relates to the experience of mobilizing healthcare system and introducing various prevention measures. We do understand how we need to act going forward, so that's why we do not plan to impose absolute restrictive measures. We are not going to go into the so-called nationwide lockdown when economy and business practically comes to a halt. Should an objective need arise, considering the recommendations of medical professionals in a particular region, city or municipality, we will undertake justified, targeted measures, which would allow to provide maximum safety for people and would help ensure uninterrupted operations of business. In this regard, I would like to urge owners of business to be socially responsible and to adhere to all the recommendations of doctors and experts when it comes to labor conditions of their personnel and employees. And in this condition, we need to fine-tune support measures for entrepreneurs. And those measures should be both operational and long-term in nature. Special focus should be on support for SMEs. I would like to highlight that we have decreased insurance payments for these companies from 30 to 15%. That is twofold. And not only for this crisis period, but on a permanent basis. And for those SMEs that work in COVID-affected industries, we have provided deferrals on taxes and insurance payments for the first quarter of this year. And the deferral might last up to 6 months. But I would like to draw your attention to the fact that not all companies that have been affected by COVID have managed to recover, and they still have problems. First and foremost, I'm talking about public catering and other services. And for this kind of companies, I suggest that we extend the existing tax and insurance payment deferral for 3 more months. We have also made the decision to extend for the entire 2021 the moratorium on inspections for small businesses. This allows us to lower administrative and tax burden on dozens or thousands of companies which provide employment to millions of citizens. And we are supporting jobs and incomes of people this way. Despite all the challenges of this year, Russia has overall managed to ensure macroeconomic stability. We have avoided inflation spikes and ensured financial sustainability of the market. It is on this sound basis that we are going to plan our steps ahead. We are going to unite the efforts of the state and business community in order to overcome the economic downturn, to recover employment figures, and to set the national economy on the growth trajectory. We are already acting on various tracks, for example, promotion of investment, development of export, and broad introduction of digital technologies. Those are factors that can create long-term qualitative growth. Once again, I would like to underscore that we need joint, coordinated steps. When the measures of the states to develop infrastructure, advancing laws, and direct support to industries are complemented by business investments into the creation of new productions and well-paid jobs. Only in this case we can have this comprehensive cumulative effect and real results for the economy and the well-being of the citizens. Also important is the real benefit, macroeconomic benefit for the citizens and real economy. Such stability has allowed the central bank to lower the key rate, to make loans more accessible, and the government has managed to launch new mechanisms in the interest of small and medium-sized enterprises and Russian families. For example, the preferential mortgage program at 6.5%. Such targeted support for the citizens has worked. And according to our assessment, the overall volume of mortgage this year would set a new record and would exceed 3.5 trillion rubles. Moreover, we have thus offered a shoulder to lean on for the construction industry. We have provided additional demand for the related sectors of economy which provide jobs to millions of people. As I've said, we are going to extend the preferential mortgage program until the 1st of July 2021. We will also provide additional funds from the federal budget for the development of rural mortgages. We will increase the overall volume practically threefold. At the same time, I would like to remind you of the task ahead. With the mortgages becoming more accessible, we need to create additional supply on the housing market in order to avoid any imbalances and spikes in housing prices. Otherwise, the overall effect would be wiped out. So we need to focus on infrastructure support for construction and, in general, the development of regional infrastructure, roads, communal infrastructure, public transportation, and social objects, so that the companies and regions would be able to raise additional resources for these purposes. We will develop instruments of long-term debt financing. We will eliminate regulatory restrictions, create new interesting opportunities for reliable investments of free capital and savings. Even more so that we see more activity from domestic investors, including retail investors. This is a sign of trust to the prospects of Russian economy, and that's due to the lower rates, of course, but it's also a sign of trust to the economy in general. This is a meaningful source of investment which we need to tap into for sustainable development in order to implement infrastructural and other projects of Russian companies. I would like to highlight that Russian assets, despite the current challenging period, are on demand on the market. Since the start of the year, Russian security issuers have raised at public debt markets $37 billion, and public stock offerings have yielded more than $6 billion. This is a record sum over the last years. I would like to focus on the new model of raising private investment, which we have recently tested just 3 weeks ago when Sovcomflot had its IPO at the Moscow exchange. As a result, over 42 billion rubles have been raised, and this money will not go into the budget, but it will help with new investment, for example, for the construction of new shipbuilding plants. I would like to highlight we are talking about additional resources which are going to be targeted towards the development of companies and towards the implementation of industrial projects. As a result, we get this cumulative effect for many industries and high-tech sectors. In order to strengthen and advance securities markets, we need close cooperation between the government and business. I would like to underscore the issuance of the so-called console bonds by our infrastructure company, Russian Railways. With the help of the government and the central bank, these securities have provided financing for the investment program of the Russian Railways. What is especially important is to form an order portfolio for Russian producers of equipment, carriages, locomotives. With the support of the government, we also see that the instrument of green bonds is developing, and their goal is to finance the transfer of Russian companies to the best accessible technologies. Up to 90% of coupon payments on such bonds would be insured by the state. And once again, I would like to highlight that promoting investment activities is a priority task for us, and at this moment in time and looking ahead and counting on the promising long-term growth of Russian economy. And reliable, protected mechanisms of investment into new financial instruments are open both for Russian and for foreign investors. We value each and every partner who wants to collaborate with us. I would like to highlight that an important instrument for the implementation of major projects, which are meaningful for the entire regions and territories, that is the Agreement on Protection and Promotion of Investments. As part of this agreement, the projects receive the so-called stabilization clause. That is that the tax conditions, land use condition, and urban planning conditions would remain unchanged, and investor expenses on infrastructure would be compensated in the form of taxes paid. Even now, for the use of this instrument, we have more than 24 projects, and the overall budget stands at 900 billion rubles. We have recently discussed it at the government, and I would like to ask my colleagues from the government that we need to move from theory to practice as soon as possible. And the last thing I wanted to mention, as you know, one of the national goals of Russia for the upcoming decade is digital transformation in all areas of life. This is an important factor for boosting economic dynamics in our country and better quality of life for our citizens. Leading Russian companies, first and foremost, Yandex, Sber, and VTB, and my colleague here would confirm that, have long and successfully invested in these areas. They're exploring new promising sectors and products. As a matter of fact, they turn into what we are now calling ecosystems. I believe that this speed of changes and the development of competition in this area, that is very important, and we will focus on this today later on, would provide a significant boost to our economy. In particular, it will allow many small and medium enterprises to expand their channels of distributions for their products and services, and this is, again, highly important. I believe that this topic is of interest for all our colleagues, including those who are gathered here today at this meeting. Thank you very much for your attention. And in this, I end my introductory statement. Now, I give the floor over to the host of our event today, Andrei Kostin.
Thank you, Mr. Putin. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for your participation and meaningful remarks. It is for the 12th time that you deliver a speech at our forum. It is something that investors are attracted with, and you have already said that this forum is held in quite unusual conditions and circumstances. We are getting used to it. We had doubts whether to hold the forum or not, because it is well known that many fora in Russia and abroad have been cancelled this year for the reasons we all understand, but investors were quite eager to do that, to participate, because crisis is the time when investment becomes cheaper and the prospect of growth become more evident. And this is the reason why we decided to take the gamble, so to say, and hold the forum, because we will benefit from it. Foreigner and Russian partners, investors are going to participate, and the forum is live on TV and streams online in 70 countries around the world, and everyone who wants to see and hear us will have an opportunity to do that. It is estimated that thousands and several thousands participants will hear us and see us. So let us move on to Q&A session. Hopefully all the investors eager to ask questions from different countries, different places will be able to do that. Dear colleagues, could you please introduce yourself? Say your name and organizations you represent and what country, region you represent. Thank you. Let us start our Q&A session, please. Good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Yakov Arnapolin. I am the representative of the PIMCO Investment Fund in London. So my question is as follows. We have noticed that the Russian economic growth rate over the past 5 years decreased amid demographic problems, lower migration influx, and quite a low level of FDIs. Additional funds earmarked for anti-COVID-19 measures and associated issues can result in pushing back national projects implementation. So what measures does Russia have in mind to bring up economic growth rate in the long term? Well, by and large, this is the most important question. We have actually started from it. I doubt that I'm going to give you a detailed answer. It will take much time, but I would like to note that we can see the economic downturn not only in Russia, but in the global economy in general. And as far as Russian economy is concerned, it is lower than in the economies of other countries, including the so-called developed economies. Over the second quarter of this year, there was a decrease in the United States amounting to 9%. In the EU, it is almost 14.7%. In some countries, it is 17%. So this is nothing unusual. We are part of the global trend, and our indicators are better than others. But when foreign analysts take the stock of the situation, they relate it to the structure of the Russian economy. The industries that are less affected are the flagship industries of our economy. I don't think it is so, because the decrease in the export of oil and gas is something that we notice, although they have a big share of our economy. It is connected with quite a stable situation in macroeconomic policy of the recent years. I would like to flag up that the central bank moved on to a volatile exchange rate, and it allows us to mitigate all the difficulties. So this floating rate allows us to do that. So by and large, we have tried to make it as such that our economy is independent of the rates. We have some budgetary regulations that we try to stick to, and we have kept and even increased the reserves that we have as a result of taking a decision related to the budgetary rule. But as of today, the international reserves stand at $585 million US dollars, and as far as the amount of National Welfare Fund is concerned, the indicators are very high. The debt burden is one of the lowest around the globe, and when it comes to state loan is concerned, it's 3%, and the overall debt is about 17%. And it allows us to be quite confident and develop the Russian economy in general. One of the most crucial factors, and you mentioned that, is the attraction of investment, not only FDIs, but investment in general. We assume and we indeed hope that the macroeconomic conditions that I have just mentioned will guide our potential partners. And I would like to also note the following. The polls and surveys conducted by international institutions, they asked international investors and partners, so they showed that no one wants to reject working in the Russian market, so they want to continue working with us, and the number of companies planning to be with us to working at Russia's market is going up, so we will continue to create conditions for all our investors, both Russian and foreign ones, and we know very well that we have investors mainly from Cyprus, the Netherlands, some other countries. They invest in our capital, and we have quite a free movement of capital. We do not want to restrict it and limit it in any way. This is our fundamental principle. That was actually true for 2008-2009 financial crisis, and we still stick to this principle during the pandemic crisis. And hopefully, this is the reason why you trust Russia's economy and economic policy. And we have seen that investment in the Russian market and Russian economy continue. So despite the threats, you're well aware, we're quite optimistic. There will be an economic downturn, but it will be at lower level than in other countries. It will be about 4% this year, and next year it will be 4.2%, and then in a year we'll get a surplus. So we'll get a surplus after that. This year it will be 4.4%, I mean the deficit, then 4.2%, and in a year we will get a surplus, 1% surplus, and the economy will recover. So by and large, I'm quite optimistic about the current situation. And I hope that our potential partners will appreciate that. What is important is the factor that you've mentioned. I mean, achieving objectives with the national projects. Sometimes we push the implementation back, but we do not cancel anything. Even more so, the projects that you have mentioned, I mean, infrastructure projects, including the building railroads and highways. So we have many more opportunities. We have funneled over 80 billion rubles for these purposes, and as far as investment projects are concerned, we are going to implement them as well, and deadlines have been changed. We will start implementing them even earlier, ahead of the schedule. Hopefully I have answered your question. So additional question, we have been discussing if the state can increase funds for investment, and Mr. Kudrin, in his recent remarks during an interview, mentioned that by increasing debt and using more effectively National Welfare Fund, we can do that, and our public debt is very, very low. And this figure is 40% is quite acceptable. It is not dangerous. Are we very conservative when it comes to these use of funds? Maybe we are. Maybe we should use more effectively the National Welfare Fund. Means maybe it's high time we spent the money. So you have asked whether we would be able to spend more. Yes, we would. And the second part of your question was whether we need to do that. Well, actually, we have been doing this, but the support measures that I have said about on numerous occasions, and it is somehow related to the support of specific sectors and Russia's families, families with children. So where have we got the money? Actually, that was the money from the National Fund, and the budget deficit, which stands at, I have already said actually that 3.9%. So why is it this modest? Actually, because we take advantage of our funds, including National Welfare Fund. Should we do this more actively, more frequently? Actually, this is for the central bank to decide. I am on the top of the situation, and together with our colleagues, we have been adjusting our actions. We do not need to spend more without no reason. In this case, we would face risks that are hard to calculate. I have just mentioned the construction sector. We have decreased the mortgage rate. It is now 6.5%. It is a record low. And the funds, we have got actually very much funds into the construction sector, and the number of mortgage loans is very high. But there are risks of higher prices, and we should follow on the situation. What are we going to do with the higher prices after the inflation? We should be very, very cautious, and this is actually how we have been acting. Who will be the next? Thank you. Yes, please. Could you please raise your hand and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Thank you for your comments. My name is Kaan Nazli. I'm with Neuberger Berman in London, an investment fund. My question is partly answered, and it is again about the national projects, in particular infrastructure spending. You emphasized these projects since 2018, and they were an important part of the economic growth for the past 2 years. So now with, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic changing both global and local dynamics, I wanted to ask if there's perhaps a change in focus of these projects, perhaps tackling more public health issues or some social inequality issues that might stem from the pandemic, or in addition to, of course, the pandemic, climate change is another risk. So would very appreciate your comments on this.
You've talked about national projects, infrastructure projects, and in particular about the possible shifting of focus when it comes to the problems related to social inequality and climate change. Undoubtedly, social inequality and alleviating people from poverty, those are key tasks for the government of the Russian Federation and the Russian Federation in general. This is something that is self-evident. I guess we will discuss it later on today. But the same is true for our goals when it comes to environment. This is very important for us because 70% of Russia's territory is in northern hemisphere and the northern latitudes, and 60% is beyond the polar circle. And we have houses there, infrastructure, production plants, and all of that might suffer as a result, and I've said about it several times, should permafrost thaw. And it continues to thaw, and it's a great challenge for us. And we are going to pay great attention to this, and we are going to collaborate with our partners as part of the Paris Agreement as well. We are going to strive to implement all our obligations. I'm be happy to talk about it in detail. But that doesn't mean that we are now refusing to fulfill our obligations under various national projects. And first and foremost, this is true for infrastructure. We are not canceling our infrastructure projects. We are even actually moving them even faster, and perhaps we'll be able to finish them before the timeline we have set for ourselves. We have allocated this year more than 80 billion rubles for these purposes. This is additional funding that we have provided, and we are going to keep implementing those projects. They are well known. That is the development of the so-called Eastern Polygon, the Baikal-Amur Highway, for the Trans-Siberian Road, etc., etc., so that the entrepreneurs who want to invest their money into the exploration of certain reserves would be able to actually deliver those products and deliver those materials to the Asian Pacific markets. That is the development of connections to the Black Sea, to the Azov Basin, the development of infrastructure in the Central Federal Region, and the Central Transport Hub. That is the creation of and the construction of the new highway Moscow-Nizhny Novgorod-Kazan, in order to link this highway with what we talked about with our colleagues from Kazakhstan, for example. This is the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about major infrastructure projects. But we are not limited to these projects only. For example, we also develop transport infrastructure around our major cities, around Yekaterinburg, for example, Krasnodar, and other cities with more than 1 million inhabitants. This is also part of our infrastructure development plans. I'm talking about the need to link all the areas of the Russian Federation. We're talking about seaports, airports, etc., etc. We are not going to postpone these projects. We are going to implement them in time. So, one more question. Over the recent years, we have raised more than 850 billion rubles as investment in order to take part in concessions and private concessions, for example, toll roads, etc. That was a successful experience, and we have seen this develop. But now we see that there's a shift of focus, and there's a need to substitute private concessions with public concessions, which issue bonds. For example, Autodor receives this concession and then they issue bonds, etc., etc. That might attract portfolio investors who might be interested to buy these bonds, but it would actually defer other investors who prefer to invest directly in concessions. We have Arab investors and Chinese investors, and for toll roads we have European investors as well. Are private concessions feasible and viable in Russia? Yes, this is a way of attracting private investment. And the first speaker mentioned that we want to make them profitable. When we talk about infrastructure bonds for our major companies, I'm talking about the positive experience. For example, the Russian Railroads company that has issued the so-called perpetual or console bonds. And people are glad to invest their money into these instruments and it's the right thing to do because they're insured by the state. This is a major public company, and without which we cannot imagine a proper functioning of our economy. But this does not exclude the need for attracting private investment, including into infrastructure projects, and that's what we are doing. You have mentioned several foreign investments, and Russian Foreign Direct Investment Fund is working with our investors from the Arab world, and I have mentioned that the level of trust to the Russian Foreign Direct Investment Fund is quite high, and many people have decided to automatically invest their money into our projects as the Russian Foreign Direct Investment Fund invests in the same projects up to 10%. So we are not canceling anything here. We are going to actually strive to keep the interest afloat. You can see that perhaps if we need some fine-tuning in this area, then you can tell that to me, and we are going to discuss it with our colleagues. The former Minister of Economy and my former advisor on economy, he is here with us today. He is the first deputy chairman of the government. Perhaps he might add something. I'd like to say that no restrictions on the existing instruments and institutions will not be introduced. We are developing a number of new instruments where the role of banks would be key, because the banks will actually buy those instruments. And if we talk about investment instruments, then together with console bonds, we are also launching green bonds. And we believe that they will be financed, and then the investment will go into environmental projects. So the first issue of such bonds is already circulating on the exchange, and we are now preparing coupon support on the part of the state for this kind of bonds. We are also launching a whole range of instruments which would allow the investors to lower their risks and lower the cost of investment. The most important of such instruments is something that you, Mr. President, have mentioned, that is the protection and the promotion and protection of investment. Lower risks mean lower cost of loans, and that is the instrument of our monetary policy. And we are now increasingly using this use of special investment contracts, which are of great interest for foreign investors, and a number of other instruments as well. So when it comes to instruments and the collaboration between the state and public and private investors, we are working in this area. As for infrastructure investment, you can just look at the numbers. We have this comprehensive plan that the President has mentioned. Apart from the project mentions, we have the Northern Sea Road project and a number of other infrastructure projects as well. And if this year we spent 365 billion rubles for this project of state budget, and the money is also coming from state companies, just in a year, this number will go up to 562 billion rubles. And by 2023, that would be almost 600 billion rubles. And since 2019, that's almost 3 trillion rubles. That's some large sum of money. We have never invested this much in infrastructure, apart from highways, which is sort of a separate kind of project. I would like to remind you that what the Deputy Chairman just said, the special investment contract that was mentioned, we have signed those contracts for 900 billion rubles already. And the state actually assures that the conditions under this contract remain unchanged for the entire period of its duration. And the development of infrastructure under those projects is ongoing, and I do hope that our private partners and our business partners would actually adhere to the obligations they undertook under those contracts. As for SPIC contracts, that is indeed a very interesting instrument, not only for Russian but also for our foreign partners. We know this firsthand because I have taken part in discussions with our foreign partners regarding various aspects of those special investment contracts. So we are trying to adapt this instrument so that it would correlate with the long-term development of Russian economy, the real sector of the Russian economy, and also correlate with the interests of our foreign partners. Colleagues, go ahead.
Hello. Can you hear me? This is Felix Hoffman calling in from Dika Investment in Frankfurt. Fiscal and monetary stimulus has been put in place in Russia, like in many countries around the world. How can you ensure that support will benefit those companies, specifically SMEs, that are directly affected by COVID-19, rather than helping large corporates through, for example, lower interest rates, as seems to be the case in Euroland?
As for the SMEs, major part of all the support measures undertaken by the government of the Russian Federation actually targets SMEs. This is what we started with. Although those measures were closely tied to certain demands on the representatives of business. And the main thing here is to keep jobs and keep the level of income for the employees. I'm not going to list all support measures. You can find them easily online. I'm talking about preferential loans in order to keep the number of jobs stable, grants for the same purpose, that is tax deferrals, and I've also suggested additional measures regarding the extension of this deferral period. That is the avoidance of pressure on the part of administrative bodies and inspections. And I've also suggested that we extend the time that we place the ban on inspections for small and medium-sized enterprises. So we have a whole package of support measures that is aimed first and foremost at small and medium enterprises. And the second step would be the support measures for major companies, first and foremost in manufacturing industries. We are going to keep doing that. We are going to be very attentive as to how those measures perform. And overall, we are being efficient, but at the same time, we're saying that not everyone receives support for a number of reasons. And the government, as instructed by me, they are preparing further steps in this area. We'll see how the situation is going to unfold. We see that, for example, in public catering, in the service sector, first and foremost, actually, in the service sector, businesses are in a very difficult situation up to this day, and we are going to respond to that. And we are also going to respond to the situation in major companies, but small business is the focus of our measures. We have around 20 million people employed in various small enterprises. That's a great number of people. So in just a couple of years, around 25 million people will work in this industry. And in order to have that number, in order to implement this goal, we need to act accordingly, and this is what we are going to do in future. I've talked about the entire package of measures that we had even before the pandemic, and we are going to keep implementing these measures. We are going to increase those efforts. Well, we can actually see that government measures have been targeted towards SMEs, and major companies had actually to renegotiate conditions with the banks. So the government was mostly protecting SMEs, and that's the result that we're seeing today. Andrei Kostin talked about the role of banks, and that was indeed a very significant role. And the bankers were actually angry with us at the first stage. They said that the major part of those support measures for SMEs was actually carried out by banks. I'm talking about credit measures and other measures that we have used. But those decisions were indeed justified, and the banking sector has not suffered. They have kept their portfolio of clients when they deferred the payments on credit by SMEs, and they have kept a major part of their clients. We have never been angry with the president. Maybe we have been angry with someone else, but not with the president. Well, I'm actually aware of that. I guess that was justified. And once again, I would like to repeat that it has not harmed in any way the banking sector, but at the same time, it has supported various subjects of Russia.
So who is next? Please, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Damien Boucher. I'm Chief Investment Officer at VTB Capital in London. Mr. President, Russia has been extremely fast and efficient in developing and producing a vaccine against COVID-19. Now, there seems to be a second wave happening for the pandemic, and it's starting to have a similar impact in Russia as in quite a few other countries. So my question is twofold. When do you expect to see a broad distribution of a vaccine against COVID-19 to provide a convincing protection for the Russian people? Also, you've had significant expressions of interest from the export market for this vaccine. Could you tell us maybe which countries are likely to be the first recipients? Thank you very much.
Well, indeed, our experts and scientists have been actively and effectively, indeed, paved the way of developing the vaccine, and it shows that Russia has preserved and has been developing academic schools established back in the Soviet Union period, and we are glad we managed to preserve the academia circles and the developments, and we thank the Gamaleya Center and Vector Center from Novosibirsk. These are good medications, and most importantly, they should be safe and effective. And these two requirements have been met in the first and the second cases. And the third vaccine is in the pipelines, and we have only one thing to do. We need to ensure the production output to produce the necessary number of vaccines. So we need special equipment, hardware for producing it on a large scale. So two things are important here. Firstly, we should provide vaccines to the Russians, our fellow compatriots, and protect them from this very dangerous infectious disease. Second, I cannot say that we refuse to work in foreign markets, but we agree to do that, and experts estimate it at $100 billion a year. And actually, we are ready to sell intellectual property rights, and we are ready to produce vaccine or vaccines at production facilities of our foreign partners. They have the necessary equipment, and it is not to the detriment of the vaccination that will take place in Russia, because we will need to create or buy the necessary equipment. So we are ready to work with our partners. I would like to remind you that we are willing to cooperate with our colleagues in the academic sphere, in the sphere of science, and we are well aware that many European countries have concluded contracts for getting vaccine from Great Britain. Unfortunately, the colleagues there have faced some challenges. It is done on the basis of APC of the monkeys, and we do that on the basis of the APC of humans, and it is the so-called missile that would target the illness inside, the virus inside people's bodies. So we had no interruptions and disruptions. Both vector vaccine and the vaccine produced by Kamale Center are quite effective. The most important thing is to produce the vaccine on a mass scale, on a large scale, so that all the regions would get it, and hopefully we'll start mass vaccination late this year. And the first partner who got the vaccine was Belarus, as you have probably heard. Together with Belarus, we are parts of a union state, and as far as I know, the work related to vaccine is moving on smoothly there. Thank you. Let us move further. So who would like to take the floor, please?
Mr. President, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Marcin Wiśniewski with the fund Bluecrest Capital based in London. My question is about the monetary policy and institutional setup of monetary policy in Russia. The economic emergency that COVID-19 created in the world has pushed the economic policy making to its limits. A lot of global central banks have adopted much more aggressive or more proactive role in part of the policy response. As you know, a number of central banks have reduced their key interest rates to zero or even negative, have engaged into direct purchases of government bonds, or in some cases even corporate bonds directly in the market. The Federal Reserve in the United States has even officially changed or amended its inflation targeting regime into average inflation targeting regime, signaling that they would in the future tolerate higher inflation to support economic recovery. In the meantime, Central Bank of Russia has continued its very conservative traditional policymaking. It has reduced rates somewhat. However, given the persistent track record now of inflation below target since mid of 2017, despite very, very large currency volatility and economic shocks, there's perhaps space for central bank to engage a little bit more actively to support growth and recovery. So I was wondering, do you believe in the current environment there is room and space for Central Bank of Russia to become a little bit more proactive? Do you think there's room to engage in more unconventional, even monetary policy, or even to use a little bit more space within the conventional policy that they currently have?
Я уверен, что
So I'm certain that many colleagues in Russia were listening to your question very attentively and applauded you, supported you, because in Russia, as in many other countries, there is always a debate about that. And when it comes to untraditional regulation methods, you know, we have been quite cautious about that, but we understand the need for these untraditional forms, including untraditional marriages. I would like to flag up the word understand. So we understand that. And I, as the head of state, should deal with demographic problems, and as a result of untraditional marriages, there would be no children born. And when it comes to untraditional instruments of monetary policy, can be good, but if they suit us, our economy today, it is a big question, and we follow up on the developments in some countries. What measures are taken there, how efficient they are, and indeed, many central banks buy public bonds, state bonds, and the US FRS buys government bonds of big American companies. We should check this information, but we believe it's not the main function, the main role of the regulator and the financial market. It is not the main function of the central bank either. I mean, the Russian Federation Central Bank. However, what it will result in, it is highly needed in the cases when we lack resources for development, but take Chile or Poland, our neighbor. They have been using these tools, but as we can see, there are no adverse consequences. We have been following up on very attentively, but there is 10% budget deficit in Poland, if I'm not mistaken, and ours is twice lower, and next year it will be only 2.4%, or even lower, no, lower. So it will decrease, twofold. What does it mean in real life? Government bonds are bought by central banks, and just issuance. It leads to a bigger volume of money supply, and then it will raise inflation. We should be very attentive about that. It is within the necessary limits. It's about 4%. This is our target, but there is such a danger, especially for Russia. And if inflation is on the rise, prices become higher, and we should fulfill our social commitment. And so what does it mean? It means that the budget deficit will only grow. Europe has quite strict but kind person we can turn to, I mean the Federal Republic of Germany, but we have no one to turn to, so we should stick to the rules that allowed us to maintain a sustainable macroeconomic situation in the country last year, so that the confidence of our partners, including private investors, today's private investors and potential private investors would be confident over the fundamental basics of the Russian economy. So we will act like that. We will. I cannot rule out anything, but we do not need that right now. Thank you. So we move on to another question. Colleagues, yes, please.
Good morning, Mr. President. I'm Joaquim Nogueira from GAM Asset Management. We are a Swiss-based asset management firm. I'm based in London, and my team. Since the beginning of your presidency, you have shown a commitment towards a market economy, an open economy. And my question, an example would be the privatization program. We have participated in the Sovcom float privatization, and my question goes about that precisely. Which sectors would you open further to private investment, and which sectors you feel more protective about? So which sectors you feel should remain and which industries should remain in the hands of the state?
So, as far as I have understood, you participated in the Sovcom float IPO, and I would like to thank you for that. We have raised 42 billion, and I would like to flag up once again that the funds will be spent not on dividends, but on the contrary, although dividends are also very important to ensure the capitalization of the company, but now we will spend them to build vessels of different classes so that our enterprises and production facilities would work. And Sovcom float actually was a public company fully. Now the stock, the share taken by the government is lower, and this is actually the trend. Next year, we will ensure that the participation in the privatization will be insured for 186 public companies and some 1,000 other economic enterprises and facilities that will also be engaged in the privatization process. At the same time, I would like to pay your attention to that. There are at least two things that we take into account or that form the basis of all privatization processes. First, we assume that in any privatization deal, we should raise the effectiveness of the enterprise, create new jobs and new investment and technologies. And we should bear in mind the market conditions when this or that deal is concluded, they should be efficient from a fiscal point of view. There should be budget revenues. Once again, I have said how many enterprises participated in the privatization. There are no limitations. I mean, under the legislation of the Russian Federation. And if, there are some projects, national projects, the so-called, and foreign investors need to get a permit from the government commission, but there are no bans. And hopefully our partners will appreciate that, and together we will work within the privatization process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, we have another great partner, Investma, Ekaterina Ilyuchenko, who represents Union Investment. That is a branch of the second largest German bank, DZ, but unfortunately she could not be with us today, so she sent her question online, and she asked me to read this question. There are actually two questions. During each and every crisis, the population becomes poorer. The number of people who receive lower than the minimum subsistence amount has not decreased. What can break this trend in the medium term? The efficiency of state services with greater digitalization. You have highlighted the need to introduce artificial intelligence. On the one hand, that creates greater efficiency and speeds up the analysis of various issues, but at the same time, that is an area of the possible information maluse. From the point of protection of personal information, will Russia follow suit after China, or will we have regulation more similar to the European variant? As for the first part of your question regarding poverty alleviation, that is a very sensitive and highly important question, including for Russia. And during the pandemic, I would like to draw your attention to this fact that we are not worse than others, but I would like to highlight a different aspect that during the pandemic, all around the world, we see more poor people living beyond the poverty line. Unfortunately, that's the case in Russia as well. You're well aware of numbers, and nevertheless, I'm going to mention this. We have more than 40 million people living beyond the poverty line in the year 2000. And since then, the number of people who are in such a difficult, challenging conditions have actually decreased. And in the 2015, we have unfortunately seen a spike in the number of such people living beyond the poverty line. And then the number has gradually decreased since 2015. And if we compare with the previous year's figures, starting from the year 2000, we have actually seen a twofold decrease, even more than twofold, actually. But that doesn't mean that we are satisfied with this level. You have talked about the minimum subsistence amount, the minimum wage, and we have actually introduced an amendment to the Constitution that the minimum wage should not be lower than the minimum subsistence level. And I believe that the government is going to ensure this constitutional right. We also have a number of other instruments to support those people who are in need of such support. We are actually shouldering those people who are in need and who are poor. The next step is to make our support measures and various instruments that we employ more targeted, so that we could help people in difficult life conditions. We are talking about the pandemic period. I have already said that, and I'm going to mention that again, that a major part of the instruments that were introduced are actually targeting families with children. We have a whole set of instruments to help families with children. Unfortunately, this format would not allow me to dwell on details, but the data is open and accessible. We are talking about the support families with children aged from 0 to 3, then from ages from 3 to 7 years old. Then we have allocated greater support for children up to 16 years of age. We have actually made payments twice, payments of 10,000 rubles. I'm not even talking about the maternity payments, maternity capital. So we are now adjusting the payments according to the inflation rate. Those are all kinds of support for the people who need support from the government. As for the citizens who have lost their jobs, here we have also undertaken the necessary steps. For example, we have increased the unemployment payments, unemployment benefits. We have also have the so-called social contracts in place when we are helping people to receive advanced training, to change their profession and thus find a new job. And social contracts allow them to take part in building infrastructure for their villages and cities, etc., etc. They might be performing some unqualified labor, but at the same time they are receiving subsistence amounts. And we are also developing the sector of entrepreneurship in these areas, and we are going to keep supporting people. But the more general way to help those people and to support those people is to change the structure of Russian economy and to create well-paying jobs. So we are gradually moving to another topic that you mentioned, digitalization, investment, first and foremost, private investment, and changing of infrastructure based on various new digital platforms and digitalization of economy. That is all very important. We are not planning to follow any kind of schemes that are already in place. So you said, like, whether we want to actually do the same thing that China does or do the same thing that Europe does. We are going to have our own scheme, Russian scheme. But this very area, protection of personal data, is very important because that's part of human rights protection. And human rights include protection of yourself and your family and your of a particular individual from any kind of infringements. So we are going to see that this area would not come to a standstill, and it would continue to develop. It would help our economy to develop, our social sector to develop. It would advance our healthcare area so that people would feel this protection at all levels. I'm not going to talk about the eventual decisions about final solutions, but any sort of restrictive measures which would wipe out the idea itself, this is not something that we are going to introduce. Actually, Ekaterina asked about personal data protection related to the various public services, because we are receiving a lot of information from public companies. And recently there was a survey in the US, and 14% of Facebook users actually believe that this is the company that would ensure the protection of their private data. And recently I was in a sports center and I was running there, and they had to choose the proper program, and they said your surname, your date of birth and your email. And I was surprised at why did this sport facility, this thing, just want to know me so closely. So can the state actually interfere in this process and to regulate the amount of information that private industries require from citizens when they're providing services? This is exactly what I've mentioned. And I hope that we will find a properly balanced solutions using our technological solutions. For example, you are running in a sports center and you need to provide all these information that is so concerning to you, and you did not want to proceed with actually doing sports. but perhaps you could have your smartphone, and at the same time you could provide the necessary information to the private company who wants to learn more about you, and at the same time protect your personal data. For that, we need to work with our cutting-edge companies that are working not only in Russia but also internationally, including in the banking sector, helping to protect banking data of Russian citizens. You are well aware of that. You know about those companies firsthand, and it is on this track we will find proper information. So has your treadmill ever asked you for personal information? Well, actually, I do sports regularly, and I am the one actually asking questions, not answering questions. So, colleagues, let's move on. Who's next? Good afternoon, Igor Tishin, Harding Lover from the United States. Mr. President, you have mentioned that the introduction of digital technologies and artificial intelligence and innovations and biotech has great significance for the development of Russian economy. So I would like to ask, what role does the do the SMEs play in this? And will the Russian government develop measures in order to protect those smaller companies and startups from the competitive pressure coming from public companies like Sber and Rostech? Thank you. Well, I have partially answered this question when answering the previous question, but I can go back to that. We believe that SMEs, first and foremost, high-tech sector, is highly important for us. In this area, I would not like to diverge from the main trends in global economy. I would want our major companies to generate the need for the creation of a whole cluster of startups, startups from the small and medium enterprises, because we have a great number of such startups. But what we actually need to do is to create conditions in which Russia's economy would generate the need and the demand for such services. And the second component is the efficient work of the anti-monopoly laws and the proper application of the existing laws. I believe that this industry is well regulated, and both Sber and Rostech are actually adhering to the regulation in place despite their size and despite their great opportunities. They are trying to engage various private structures. Speaking of Sber, they do not want to be just a bank. They want to be an entire ecosystem. Although the requirements for Sber as a banking institution are not cancelled, and I would like their clients to know that. They have to fully adhere with all the requirements for the banks. But undoubtedly, when we have greater opportunities and greater areas for cooperation, we are talking about public control. We are talking about the control of the central bank, so that we could minimize the potential risks when implementing a certain kind of projects. We know that there are no additional risks, and the central bank is actually drafting some proper policies in this place in order to ensure the interests of their clients, in order to ensure that their activities are safe and secure as part of the new digital platforms. As for Rostech, you know that even in the defense sector, tech raises private capital and private companies, including high-tech companies. Here, there's nothing unusual. What is unusual for us that in some cases, Rostec even sells the majority of stock and thus yields control to private sector in certain projects when it comes to the defense industry. And up to this point, this has all been justified. And those companies with private capital and those private investors, they provide the necessary investment into this area. They actually help those companies reach a new technological level of development, and they are working quite efficiently. And this is how we are going to carefully act onwards. Perhaps Mr. Tishin's question was prompted by the fact that in October, the US has published a significant report of the relevant committee of the Congress, where 4 leading digital platforms, that's Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and Google, were accused of using their unlimited control over digital infrastructure in order to squeeze out their competitors, for example, by unilaterally regulating the market. And the Republicans believe that major digital companies actually take part in political censorship, and they're not providing all information available. So this question is widely discussed in the US, and that's why we had this question. Thank you for your answer. I believe that the answer is as clear as the question. Let's move on. I have to say that those discussions are understandable, and we are following those developments, and we are concerned about certain things, but we believe that this is something unavoidable that has to arise in modern conditions. We do not see any emergency here, but we are closely following those developments and those discussions, and should need arise, we will respond.
So let us move on. We have time. Colleagues, please.
Good afternoon from Frankfurt in Germany. My name is Christian Kopf. I'm working for Union Investment. Mr. President, it has been 20 years already since you took office, and the modest prosperity that Russia has attained over this period still remains very much concentrated in the capital. Yet 60 kilometers, 100 kilometers outside of Moscow, people live right next to pipelines that transport lucrative gas to the West, and they themselves have no access to gas connections to their homes, to heat their homes. So why has your administration been unable to reduce these regional disparities within Russia? And which measures do you believe need to be taken in the medium term to address this issue?
There is some political charge in your question. The quality, the standard of life in the beginning, in the noughties and in 2020 is very, very different. It's a far cry, actually, and the development of economy is different. The level of stability, economic stability level is different from the one we saw in the noughties. Inflation, there was 2-digit inflation, or even 3-digit a year, I mean. Now it is only 4%, and the figure is quite stable. Our international reserves stood at 12 billion, and the external debt was about 136 billion. The rate of unemployment was very, very high. We have a different country and different economy right now. $585 billion US dollars. This is the figure of our international reserves. And as far as overall debt burden, it is twice lower, and our public debt is at 3%, and the level of income is different. There are many people who live on a breadline. according to the recent estimates, about 20 million, and in the notice the figure was 42 million, and in the near future will decrease this number twofold. The situation has changed drastically, and when it comes to gas supply, I cannot say that I am satisfied with the gas supply in the country, although we have making steps in this direction. On average, the gas supply stands at 60 or 70%, and central federal entities, the gasification stands at 70%. And in some regions we have much to do. Our gas experts ensure the break-even point in Gazprom, but they create financial conditions, and it is very, very important. And I would like our foreign partners and Russian citizens to know about that. So, natural gas export prices are much higher than prices for Russians. So allow us to ensure gasification inside the country, to implement plans in this sphere. It gives us a competitive edge for our economy. And our European partners do not always agree with that, and they try to create obstacles for us. Well, it is our competitive edge. It's natural. And why does anyone think that we should limit it somehow beyond the market instruments? I do not think that it is the right thing to do. So we will continue to implement programs, gasification programs inside the country, no doubt. And additional instructions were given to the government, and I'm looking forward to receiving new proposals. So we should synchronize main pipelines, the building of them, and with the possibilities of regions and entities, municipalities, to make it as such so that the end consumer receives the gas. So finally, it is very important for us to connect the western and eastern areas of gas production. This is our end goal, and it will allow us to work at external markets and realize gasification plans at the same time. This is a priority task, and we will try to fulfill it effectively. Thank you. Thank you for your questions. So, colleagues, who is going to take the floor next? Please, don't be shy.
Hello, Mr. President. My name is David Reed, and I work for Wellington Management in London. My question is about oil taxation. The government has been considering changes in the oil tax regime, with some tax breaks which were intended to help stimulate investment in marginal fields, potentially being changed to the newer profit-based framework. What are the overall goals of this process? Should we expect the oil companies to bear a higher tax burden, or should any changes to the tax be roughly neutral overall? I also have a second question, if there is time to address it. How do you see consolidation in the electricity sector developing, and what will be the role of state companies like Interau in this process? Thank you very much.
So as far as the taxation in the energy sphere and oil production is concerned, I can say that we made those changes. There will be nothing serious in the future. We have moved on to the use of new instruments, including MET and additional revenues tax. It is done in order to eliminate previous restrictive measures and measures ensuring benefits. that has now become outdated. Our end goal is the following. We should revamp the taxation system, fine-tune it, so that we would not use the oil fields that are not that efficient, but we should make our companies interested in developing new oil fields and deposits and use new advanced technologies. This is actually what this is all about. This is true for all deposits that has been long developed. It is related to extra viscous oil and viscous oil. That was the dialogue with our oil producers. Was an uphill task, actually, but I hope we managed to strike the balance. Yes, indeed. When it comes to additional revenue tax, there have been some changes. This was done to ensure that there would be no extra revenues that are not in line with the legislation. So we try to maintain dialogue with our oil producers when it comes to tax on additional income. So there would be no drastic changes. But when it comes to possible consolidation of electricity assets, and the second part of the question was related to which company? Yeah, Interau. Okay. So what can I say? When it comes to electricity sector, I believe that it can be divided into two parts. The one included with electricity generation and the sale or the distribution of electricity. It is within the market and it should be in line with the market regulations. Second thing is the transfer of electricity and we should bear in mind the geography of the country, and Russia is the biggest country in the world, so we should provide support to electricity producers. There should be certain regulations in place. So, since the first part, I mean generation and distribution, and it is actually what that Russian company, Interau, yes, Interau company has been dealing with. So we see no need to make some drastic changes. The company has been quite efficient. It has demonstrated high performance, and as far as I know, they are planning to develop its business so that it would deal not only with the generation and distribution of electricity inside the country, but it has been quite active at foreign markets. And as far as the transfer is concerned, we have consolidated the packages of our two leading companies, and we should make unified rules in this sphere, so they should be applied to the country in general. We should do this using market tools and methods. We should do everything so that this natural monopoly would be even more strengthened.
All right. Good afternoon, Your Excellency. Firstly, I would like to thank you for this rare opportunity today. With you is Saeed Al-Mirar from Abu Dhabi Investment Authority in UAE. If I may, Your Excellency, ask the following questions. Do you think that the US elections could change the political landscape, global political landscape? Second, what's your future strategic vision for Russia post-COVID-19 in the context of the foreign investments and trade? Thank you.
Повлияют ли выборы в США как на ситуацию после выборов?
В мире?
Да, ну и для России в частности.
Для России?
Ландшафт изменится, глобальный ландшафт.
Вы знаете, ну, мне бы не хотелось затрагивать тему выборов в США.
I would rather not touch upon elections in the US because whatever I say, our foreign partners would latch onto that to prove Russia's purported interference into the elections in the United States. I would say, in general, that the US policies are very important globally because it affects the whole world. The US is a powerful state. It is very strong economically, so it influences the whole planet. We do not know how and what is being planned by the two Biden and Trump's teams, but I have already said, and there is no secret about it, the Democratic Party sticks to a socialized approach to a number of issues inside the country and internationally. It reminds me of European Social Democrats, and probably the solutions, if implemented by Mr. Biden's team, whatever people, but we know the philosophic principles. So the implementation of these plans would require big expenditures in educational and social spheres. This is not bad. I'm just speculating and thinking about the consequences. So it will require new expenditures amid high public debt in the US. So we can think of the consequences for the planet in general and for the global economy, since Russia is part of this economy. So we will adapt to whatever consequences we will see, because we are all interdependent, but still I have already put this quite firmly in answering one of the previous questions. So the Russia's sovereignty in the economic sphere has become higher over the past years, although this interdependence still exists. And once again, we are confident that we'll cope with any scenario. What the team of the acting president will do, what new people will it include. So actually we have said a few words about the Federal Reserve System's support to big companies and small ones who supported them to buy debt bonds, and the rate of the Federal Reserve System. Actually, this is how the administration influences on this process, and we can see some willingness to move production from Asia to the US territory. There are advantages, but there are at the same time things we should pay attention to. I mean, the price of goods that are now produced in Asia. We have been analyzing what's going on and will accept any decision the American people will take, and we will work with any administration that will get the upper hand. Hopefully the decisions will be well balanced, and we feel quite confident about it. By the way, the most part of our work today actually there are some drawbacks of our work with the United States. 46 times, this is the number of cases when sanctions were imposed on Russia by the United States. It was something that we haven't seen before, but our turnover rose by 30%. However strange it may seem, despite all the restrictions. And we have been quite effectively worked on stabilizing the situation in energy markets.
I know that President Trump, because we have actually had a trilateral talk with President Trump and the King of Saudi Arabia. President Trump actually took an active part in this process, and thus he supported not only his oil producers, not only the industry in general. We have also managed to stabilize the prices. We have done it together. So it means that in those situations when we can unite our efforts, we are quite efficient. And there are certain economy sectors that are of common interest for all our countries. As for the United Arab Emirates, we have some good relations with your country and with the Prince as well. We are actively working towards stabilizing oil markets. And also when it comes to investment activities, I would like to thank you for the trust into your Russian partners and for your trust in Russian economy. Your investment activities are quite successful and have been developing successfully. Now we are covering more and more areas for investment, and we are going to do the best we can in order to ensure not only efficiency but also reliability of your investment. Thank you very much. Next question, please. Who's next?
Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Giancarlo Perasso, and I'm a lead economist at PGIM Fixed Income in London. Mr. President, the 2035 National Energy Strategy seems to indicate that Russia wants to increase its production and export of oil and gas further in the coming years, especially by exploiting the Arctic regions. This development raises two types of concern, in our view. On the economic front, it would increase Russia's dependence on oil and gas revenues at a time when many importing countries like the European Union and China are setting ambitious targets and policies to reduce their dependence on such fuels. On the environmental side, the production and consumption of these fuels would contribute to the continued increase in permafrost thaw, Arctic wildfires, and other extreme events that are already having a significant impact on Russia's environment and infrastructure. So do you think that the energy strategy should be reviewed so that Russia could become a less oil and gas dependent country and the world leader in tackling climate change? Thank you.
Mr. Perasso, undoubtedly, this is a question that I expected to hear, and this is a very important question, because the humanity in general is now engaged in discussions of those issues, and the humanity is trying to find the best way to tackle these issues. The first thing I would like to draw your attention to, we are not actually increasing our dependence on oil and gas. On the other hand, we are decreasing our dependence on oil and gas. This is evidenced by real numbers. For example, the revenues of the Russian budget. The oil and gas part of the budget revenues actually goes down, but the non-oil and gas revenues is actually going up. Still, we are much dependent on oil and gas, but we see some progress. And our goal, as I've mentioned, is using various tax instruments to restructure the economy in such a way that it would become more diversified. This is one of the major goals that we have. And in general, we are gradually and carefully moving towards this goal. And this is what we are going to do onwards. Just now, your colleague asked about our innovations when it comes to oil production and gas production. And I've just said that our goal is to restructure the tax system in such a way as to explore new oil deposits and use new technologies and new innovative solutions. Yes, they do indeed have something to do with increasing oil production or keep it at the same level. That is true. But we are doing that based on the forecast which is provided by recognized and well-respected international companies and analytical centers when it comes to the demand and the structure of oil demand in the coming decades. We are well aware of the fact that in the coming decades, we would not be able to fully move away from hydrocarbons unless we would abruptly lower the competitiveness of our companies, which is hard to tackle. It is not possible to do in the coming 10 years, and of course, you understand that. The structure of demand and supply will change, but it will change gradually. We also understand how the Asia-Pacific market is going to evolve and Asian market in general. We see the structure of consumption in China, in India, in other countries of the Asia-Pacific region. We understand the goal that Europe is striving to achieve, but we would not want to see any new market restrictions for the activities of our companies, because our European partners are always proud of their market approach towards economic development. And I do hope that those rules would be universal in nature and would actually cover not only the participants of the European market inside the market, but also would include their partners beyond the borders of the EU, and would also involve Russia, because we are the largest supplier of energy resources to the European market. And when it comes to gas, more than 70% of export comes from Russia. But we are also expanding our supplies to the Asian market. It's a very promising market for us. We are expanding our supplies to China, to Japan, to India, and to other countries in the region of this very promising and growing market. We are also trying to reorient our supplies, not because we do not like something, strategically speaking, but because the market in Asia is growing and we see greater demand for our products. So we are prepared for ever-increasing demand. What is important here, as I see it, is that we understand that the structure of the import-export, the supply-demand structure is going to change. This is unavoidable. And this is something that we have to prepare for in advance. But the structure of our energy sector is one of the greenest in the world, because major part of our energy is produced by hydropower and by nuclear power. And then comes gas. Out of all hydrocarbons, gas is the most ecological type of fuel, the most environmentally friendly one. I've mentioned that several times, and people don't understand. Okay, so buy electric cars, but where are you going to take electricity? Not from an outlet. Electricity comes from electric power stations. And if those electric power stations are powered by coal, for example, however many electric cars you might buy, the situation in the world in general would not become any better if the initial source of energy is a major polluter. And here in Russia, we also implement various major plans in order to change the situation for the better. For example, in the coming years, we plan for our 300 major polluters. Until the end of last year, they should introduce the best practices when it comes to being environmentally friendly, and which would allow them to decrease emissions. And in 12 cities up to 2024, they would cut those emissions in half. And up until 2030, not only in those 12 cities, but also all over the country, they are going to cut their emissions. And this is what we want to achieve. We were talking about hydrogen energy, solar power, wind power. Our companies with those most innovative technologies are developing those projects not only in Russia, but are also moving beyond Russian market to international markets, and they feel confident in this area, and we are going to provide our support to them. There's no doubt about that. As a bank, we see that we have major investment into oil refineries and gas refineries in the Far East, etc., etc. So the balance is going to shift towards this direction. Instead of exporting oil and gas, we will export gas products and oil products. I see that our colleague here is concerned by the fact that the majority of our promising project has now moved to the Arctic region, and we are aware of that. And we know that the work in the Arctic region should be ensured when it comes to introducing proper security and safety measures, because the environmental situation is very fragile there, and we need to do everything we can in order to ensure adherence to the required environmental standards. However, the volume of our production will always be compared to the demand in the market. Recently, I've seen information that 10 years ago, in the world, among 10 major companies in terms of capitalization, 4 companies were oil companies and others were high-tech. And now we have only 1 oil company and 6 digital companies. And in Russia, out of our major capitalization companies, we have 5 oil companies and only Yandex, which is a digital company. And do you see this situation change in 10 years? Maybe we'll have other major digital companies. Well, I hope so, and Yandex is developing successfully. I hope that no non-market instruments will be used against them by their partners and competitors, but I have no doubt that Yandex is going to keep growing and expanding, and other companies in Russia as well, such as Mail.ru and Rostelecom and Sber, have some very good prospects, and we are going to support them in every way. Thank you very much. The next question, colleagues, over to you now. Mr. President, thank you for your time. My name is James Rose. I work in London. My question is similar to the previous one.
The EU Parliament recently voted to reduce CO2 emissions by 60% by 2030. Does Russia aspire to a similar target? And you mentioned the Arctic, and of course, many companies are responsible for the emissions over the Arctic and other Russian regions, often purely for cost saving rather than production. Could Russia apply regulatory pressure on those companies, or would you plan to even set up new companies rather than transform the current ones? Спасибо большое.
Create companies exploring deposits in Arctic, you mean, in the Arctic?
No, more just the emissions over the Arctic from many companies. Just emissions in general.
Ну, вы знаете, я не фиксирую того, чтобы наши компании...
I haven't recorded the fact that our companies have emitted pollutants as far as the Arctic projects are concerned that have been implemented. This is done on the basis of most cutting-edge technologies. Yamal LNG or Arctic 2, for example, realized by Novatek company together with French and Chinese partners. There have been no emissions, and a town is built in the Arctic, and they are in line with the environmental norms and regulations. There are no risks. As far as oil companies' activities is concerned, they have just made first steps, and they still use modern and advanced technologies. As far as Europe is concerned, it has its own norms and rules of behavior and conduct. It is naturally cannot be doubted, since Europe is the biggest market, one of the biggest economies in the world, and our biggest partner. However, we have assumed obligations and commitments under the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and I have mentioned that already. It is related with cutting emissions in comparison with 1990. And as we implemented the Kyoto Protocol, we will definitely honor our obligations under the Paris Climate Change Agreement. It is not only the fact that we show respect to the global economy and global politics. This is something we are deeply interested in, and I have already said about the permafrost. Yes, indeed, it's a challenge, and we understand it very well, and we will continue to cut emissions. I have mentioned what plans we have to ensure that 30 polluters comply with the norms, then about 12 most biggest cities that are at the same time biggest pollutants, and we continue to decrease the number of emissions twofold by 2024, but we cannot be in line with the EU regulations at the same time. So once again, all the tasks that our partners have set should be analyzed from the point of view of efficiency. There are certain difficulties, as far as I understand. Some countries abandon nuclear energy, abandon using coal. Gas is the greenest hydrocarbon. There is almost no emissions when it comes to gas use. I do not understand why countries championing for the use of renewables and green sources of energy try to abandon gas and try not to use gas at all. I cannot understand why. If there are some companies and people who are champions for environmental protection, they should create conditions for gas projects, because gas is the cleanest hydrocarbon. It is very effective when it comes to its use. So I believe that we'll continue to maintain the dialogue despite all the difficulties related to the economy, the pandemic, and the political differences and controversies we have when it comes to real economic interests, which is actually tantamount to the well-being of people, both in Russia and Europe. So hopefully this interest will blaze the trail, just like our icebreakers do that in the Arctic, and will come up with a good solution. In the 20th century, the population came up with the new types of energy, moving from less efficient to more efficient, and found out there is nuclear energy. It has biggest opportunities and capacities. Now we go back, actually. We have wind turbines, volcanoes in the Iceland. When you fly over Europe, it seems that Don Quixote will appear out of nowhere with the windmills. So maybe we will have some other opportunities to harness. There are many types of energy, and the population of the globe should think about new sources of energy apart from renewables. Yes, thank you for the time that you have given me in order to come up with new types of energy. I am actually supporting some European partners. And first deputy chair of the government has already mentioned green bonds. This is one of support tools for the companies working in the sphere of energy. Sun, what's about it? Well, there is sun everywhere, and you have already mentioned the work in the Arctic, and I mentioned that too. And it was quite strange for us that solar panels can be used to provide heat to our infrastructure facilities in the Arctic. For example, pipe systems. And there is enough sun in the Arctic even to solve this problem, and no one needs to use coal and emit many pollutants. This is also part of my answering to your question. We have been doing that right now. Oil or gas are produced, and heating systems receive heat and energy from solar panels. So we have been working in all those areas. Okay, fine. Let us move further. Who will be next?
Question. This is Rollo Orozco from Schroders Investment Management in London. I think a large portion of my question has already been covered in the questions that Giancarlo and James have posed. But I guess still staying on the renewables theme, I think I would just like to ask a question as to which sector do you think should be investing in renewables? Should that be dependent on the oil and gas sector to start investing in some of the transitions in terms of solar or wind going forward? Or do you think it should be the utilities sector that bears that additional investment risk? And at what point do you think they should start thinking about investing there more heavily, despite the fact that there is still a strong demand tailwind for oil and gas going forward? Thank you.
Я уже, вы меня, пожалуйста, извините, мне бы не хотелось повторяться.
Sorry, I wouldn't like to repeat myself. I have just mentioned that we are going to work in all those areas, including hydrogen sphere, wind power, solar power. Some Russian companies have been buying equipment and assets in Switzerland, for example, and deploy equipment here in Russia. We have been using solar energy, solar power in the Arctic. We are going to cut emissions and use green bonds and so on. So we have a toolbox available. As far as where we should invest, it seems that it depends on the investor himself or herself. He or she takes into account the current situation and prospects and the profit he or she can get while implementing this or that project as part of investment project. I have already mentioned of the Russian FDI fund, and the colleague from the United Arab Emirates represents one of the funds, and he confirmed that our Russian Foreign Direct Investment Fund raises profit. I don't know actually what it is estimated at, but it is higher than in many regions of the world. So this is it actually. If someone wants to invest in some kinds of types of energy, we would welcome that. But when it comes to hydrocarbon sector, we've opened the doors, so to say. We are open to new ideas and proposals. All companies from around the world, American companies, unfortunately, the work of American companies is limited. The expands actually, but it was not our solution. But we have always been ready to work with Americans, Europeans, and our friends from Asian countries, and Japan, and China, France, the United Kingdom companies. So hopefully they will do that in the future. When it comes to where to invest, it is up to them to decide, and our task is to protect the investment and use efficiently the money they brought to us. We are going to have a big project in the Arctic area, in Siberia, in eastern Siberia, and I'm certain it would be very interesting to our partners. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you for taking my call. My name is Arif Joshi. I'm with Lazard Asset Management based in New York. And I actually wanted to follow up with a comment that you had made earlier. The market seems to agree with you that in the event on Tuesday of a Joe Biden victory, that you're likely to get significant fiscal spending in the United States, a significant fiscal deficit next year. And that likely results in a depreciation of the US dollar versus many other currency pairs. Given that it has been a very, very difficult time period over the last decade for non-dollar currencies, this may offer a new opportunity over the next couple of years for currency appreciation. And so I'm curious, how would currency appreciation change the way that you overall manage the Russian economy? Does it accelerate certain reforms that you have been targeting in the future? Thank you.
As far as new sectors of Russian economy, it is actually what we are striving to do. Hopefully it will be a digital sector, digitalization in the broadest sense of this word is what we're striving at. So we will tune our fiscal regulations so that our partners and Russian investors, foreign friends, would work comfortably in sectors related to new technologies. As far as what happens to dollar after a possible victory of Joe Biden, it is too close to call. I have already said that if such socially oriented programs will be implemented in the US when it comes to economy and budget system. Well, actually, it is very difficult to say, taking into account a very high debt in the United States. What is Federal Reserve System will be. So we do not know, actually. As far as possible Trump's victory is concerned, we know what has been done over the past 4 years. Probably the line he has taken will be retained, and we will be able to forecast the new developments. Beyond debate, changes related to dollar, and the dollar is not only national currency of the biggest economy in the world, but at the same time is reserves currency would affect all the countries and all economies. it is quite evident. So it will affect us as well, and we take that into account. So this is why we try to strengthen Russia's economic sovereignty. And by and large, with the help of sound macroeconomic policy, we managed to do that. We weaned the economy off the volatile prices, gas prices, fluctuations. Okay, so we are quite stable when it comes to the fluctuations of our national currency, and the central bank has been taking cautious measures to make our national currency rate stable, and it is very important that we should take into account not the rate, but the predictable stability of this rate. And by and large, the central bank has managed to do that. It is very important, and hopefully, despite any fluctuations and any volatilities in the U.S., will retain good positions here in this country.
Next question, please, colleagues. Well, just a few more questions, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Tiu Bik Nguyen, and I'm from Taiping Asset Management. I'm based in Hong Kong. You've made some comments regarding the energy markets and Asia, and this relates to my question. So in relation to gas production, Russia has pivoted to Asia. Would you be able to discuss Russia's longer-term strategy relating to this pivot to the Asia region? Thank you very much.
We have not so much as pivoted towards Asian market, but we are taking into account the current situation. So what is the current situation? The first thing that we see is that Asian markets are developing rapidly, despite the pandemic, despite all the complexities related to the pandemic. We see that Asian markets continue to grow, despite all of that. As I've said, here in Russia, unlike to all the other developed countries, we do have an economic turndown, but it's not as deep as in other countries. The downturn of our economy is 3.9%. So we also have some other serious factors in place. So the economic downturn in Russia stands at about 4%. From 3.9 to a little over 4%, because the government has its estimates and the central bank has its own estimates. In other countries, we have deeper recession, but in China, we actually see economic growth. Maybe not such great growth that they would hope for, but that's some substantial growth that we see, and China remains the locomotive when it comes to the development of global economy. And the overall volume of China's economy when it comes to buying parity is greater than in the US. As per capita, perhaps in the US this buying power is higher, but when it comes to the overall volume, it is higher in China. And when it comes to per capita economic recession, it's actually, we have lower numbers than elsewhere, so it's good. As for the volume of trade, if we compare Asia or Europe, Asia is actually number one on our list when it comes to trade turnover. So we are not artificially trying to change this balance. We are just looking at the current situation, assessing the prospects, and we want to be prepared for the future changes. Of course, these changes and our plans are further boosted by our friendly partner relations with our friends in Asia. I'm talking about, first and foremost, China. I'm talking about India and with all our partners in Asia as well. This very positive, friendly climate, business climate, which basically makes us allies, helps to boost trust and confidence between us, and confidence and trust is the basis for the development of economic ties. This is another benefit to add to all the positive changes and factors that we're seeing in global economy, especially when it comes to the Asian markets. I do hope that all our plans will be implemented together with our partners. And the last two questions. So who's next? Please go ahead. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Jakob Grapengeiser, East Capital. I'm from Sweden, but I have lived in Moscow for many years. I have two questions. The first question is regarding Belarus. Do you see the opportunity for a deeper political integration between Russia and Belarus and the creation of a union state? And another question I have, do you see the scenario of a new presidential election taking place in Belarus? And the second question is about Nagorno-Karabakh. What is the long-term solution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict as you see it, which would satisfy all three parties, that is Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the Republic of Artsakh? Could you please repeat the second part of your question regarding Nagorno-Karabakh? What is the long-term solution of the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, which would satisfy all three parties to the conflict? As for the first part of your question regarding the union state, the agreement on the union state was signed in December of 1999. And in major part, it is being implemented or has already been implemented. Certain clauses of this agreement have not yet been implemented up to this day. This is the creation of a union parliament, the direct ballot and direct vote for the members of the parliament, the defining of common borders in this document. There are also some economic issues. For example, we had the issue of a single currency emission center for our countries on the agenda. This has not yet been accomplished, but we have actually come a long way together, and I believe that this positively affects the development of both our countries, and it has a positive effect on the social sector of both states, of Russia and Belarus. We are talking about the movement of people, we are talking about various social issues at stake, we are talking about the labor market. We have a number of specific issues which we are resolving. And this is to the benefit of the citizens of our countries. As for political issues that I've already mentioned, we need to proceed from the fact, and I agree with Alexander Lukashenko on that, that we should proceed from how the situation is unfolding as of now. In major part, it is up to the leadership of Belarus to resolve this issue, but there is nothing new that might arise as a result of the recent political events in Belarus. This process started at the end of 1999, and the agreement on the union state has everything in place. We do not believe that we need to make any amendments to this document. the question is whether we should implement certain elements of the plan that already exists and has already existed for some 2 decades. Or perhaps we should refrain from implementing certain elements of the plan. We are not trying to rush it, and we are going to see what are the actual demands here in Russia and Belarus for the implementation of particular steps mentioned in the agreement. So without any doubt, it should be done. And if anything should be implemented in practice, that should be done willingly, both by Russia and Belarus, based on the fact how both countries view their national interests in various areas, in politics and economy, etc., etc. As for the opportunity of possible new presidential elections, this is the issue to be decided upon by the people of Belarus and by the leadership of Belarus. We are not meddling with these issues. What I would like to draw your attention to is to the fact that the acting president, Alexander Lukashenko, has said multiple times and has actually taken steps to possibly make amendments to the constitution of Belarus, or maybe adopting a new constitution altogether. And on this basis, they would hold elections to the parliament and hold perhaps new presidential elections. I believe that the current situation actually dictates this proper choice, and this is a step towards meeting the requirements of his opponents. We hope that all political forces would engage in this process and would not just accuse President Lukashenko of being cunning and of playing tricks, but actually would take part in the decisions that will be the result of these new processes. That's for the first part of your question. And as for the second part of your question, Nagorno-Karabakh, as I've said multiple times, and I'm likely to say anything new, the conflict started first through ethnic clashes in Sungait and then in Azerbaijan and then in Nagorno-Karabakh itself. And back then, the USSR leadership has not undertaken any measures to ensure safety and security of people, and the Armenian people took to arms. They did it on their own. Whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, it's not clear, but they were actually forced to act because of those ethnic clashes. And what it led to is the fact that the Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 regions of Azerbaijan were now controlled by Armenia. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Azerbaijan actually said that those 7 regions have nothing to do with the ethnic conflict. Those are Azerbaijan territories from the time immemorial, and Azerbaijan says that they have the right to get those territories back. So each party here to the conflict has its own truth. And there are no simple solutions here, because the knot is tied too tightly. Our position when it comes to this conflict is open and well known. We are talking about giving Azerbaijan 5 and then plus 2 regions and ensuring a certain regime in the Karabakh area in collaboration with Armenia. So you asked about long-term resolution of this conflict, so I'm getting at the essence of your question. The thing here is to strike the proper balance of interest between the parties that would satisfy the Armenian people and that would satisfy the Azerbaijani people and the state of Armenia, so that people would feel safe and secure. But at the same time, we would have opportunities for efficient regional development by deblocking all the infrastructure opportunities, all the infrastructure potential that would be the basis for efficient development of both Azerbaijan and Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, where people are living on very modest means. So I would like to give the opportunity to many of the participants of our discussions today to take part in the development of this area. And there are areas for potential investment there, and people there are talented, they're efficient workers, and the conflict, which has lasted for some 3 decades, does not allow for proper development. But at the first stage, we need to have ceasefire in place to stop killing each other. And based on the agreement and by the propositions by the Minsk Group and the co-chairs, that is Russia, the US, France, with the participation of all the other participants of the Minsk Group, and there are many countries in it, including Turkey and a number of European states. Based on this joint work that we have accomplished to find a proper consensus and to strike a proper balance of interest, and that could be done. Thank you.
So, colleagues, the last question, who is going to ask it? Are there any questions? Yes, there is a question. Good afternoon. My name is Elena Lowen. I am the manager of Sweden Bank Robo in Sweden. I'm not going to elaborate on the climate change problems and Paris Agreement. I have been managing the funds for many years. 25 years ago, they were established. One was established in Russia, and without the work of our companies is important, and we are dependent on the high role of hydrocarbons, and such big and influential companies as Novatek, Rosneft, Gazprom they decided whether to invest into such assets so that they would be in line with the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And what are they doing to accomplish this goal? Have they developed a new renewable energy technology, like British Petroleum, Shell, and other companies have been doing? Is it a realistic scenario? What have they been doing in this area? You have asked whether our big energy companies are going to invest in projects related to the environmental protection. Actually, they will have to do that because Russian laws will make the participants of economic activities, our economic agents, be in line with the rules under the legislation, under the law, and the regulations, which are actually Russian laws now, are in line with the Paris Climate Change Agreement. We made amendments to our laws so that our biggest emitters would comply with the regulations that are set forth in the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And this is not only a demand for our foreign partners, this is something that Russian citizens need, indeed, because the environment affects the lives of Russians, and we will insist that there will be less emissions by oil and gas companies and the companies working in the sphere of metallurgy and in other sectors which are big emitters. So we are going to make headway in this area, and we try to improve the situation in the 12 biggest Russian cities. as well as across Russia and in the Russian economy. We have elaborated the plans and programs that are fixed in the law, and we will try to achieve all those goals that are related to the environmental protection. Thank you very much for your question. It is very important. Mr. Putin, several years ago, we had a meeting with the Russian Industrialists and Entrepreneurs Union, and you have given me the watch, and they are very good, and they show that we have spent on that more time than we were supposed to, and hopefully this meeting will only attract them to Russia's economy. Russia's economy needs investment. Thank you very much for your interesting and detailed speech and remarks. Thank you very much. Hopefully we will meet next year. It's what we call Mutual Admiration Society. Thank you very much for organizing this wonderful meeting and many years ago, and you continue to support it. You continue to hold these events, bringing together, bringing in the partners from all over the world. Thank you very much, dear participants, for your interest in Russia, our policies, our economic policies, and thank you very much to those who work here in Russia, and on our part we will do our utmost, everything that depends on us, so that your interests are met, so that your investment will be used effectively, and we will try to do everything so that your activities in the Russian market will be even more effective than in other regions of the world, like the Russian Direct Investment Fund have been doing in its activities with the partners from investment foundations of other countries. And I know that not only Direct Investment Fund has been working. Actually, the work in the real economic sector is underway, and hopefully the volume will only raise, and I wish you success. Thank you very much for this productive and interesting, as I say it, conversations. Thank you.